Finland 1906.
The Revolutionary Roots of Women's Suffrage. Part 1. The World Before. To understand what happened in Finland in 1906, you must first understand the world that existed before it. A world that most of us today would barely recognize, not because the buildings were different, not because the clothes were strange, not because people spoke differently, or lived differently, or dreamed differently, but because of one simple fact: half of humanity had no say in how the world was run. None. Not a vote, not a voice, not a seat at any table where decisions were made. Women in 1906 could not vote in national elections. In almost any country on earth, they could not run for office. They could not hold most government positions. In many countries, they could not own property independently, sign legal contracts, or make financial decisions without the approval of a man, a father, a husband, a brother. This was not ancient history. This was not some distant barbaric past. This was 1906, living memory. Your great-great-grandmother may have been alive in this world. She may have worked. She may have raised children. She may have paid taxes, obeyed laws, contributed to her community, and had absolutely no say in how any of it worked. This was considered normal. This was considered natural. This was considered, by most people, including most women, simply the way things were. And yet, in Finland, a small country of 3 million people, on the northern edge of Europe, something different was happening. Something that would shake the foundations of that entire world. Finland in 1906 was not an independent country. It was a grand duchy, a territory controlled by the Russian Empire, ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. The Finnish people had their own language, their own culture, their own parliament, but their ultimate ruler was in St. Petersburg. And in 1905, that ruler was in trouble. Russia had just lost a devastating war against Japan. The women who led. History remembers generals. History remembers kings. History remembers the men who signed the documents and gave the speeches and stood at the front of the photographs. But the women who changed Finland, who changed the world in 1906, were not generals, were not kings, were not the ones standing at the front of any photograph. They were ordinary, and that is exactly what made them extraordinary. Minna Silampa was born in 1866 on a small farm in western Finland. She was the daughter of a tenant farmer. She had no wealth, no connections, no formal political education. At the age of 14, she left home to work as a domestic servant. She cleaned houses. She cooked meals. She washed clothes for families who had more than she would ever have. And she watched. She watched how the world worked. She watched who had power and who did not. She watched what happened to women like her, women who worked their whole lives and died without ever being asked what they thought. And she decided that was not going to be her story. Minna Silampa became one of the founders of the Finnish working women's movement. She organized domestic servants, one of the most invisible, most powerless groups in Finnish society, into a political force. She argued that every woman, regardless of class, regardless of education, regardless of how society had decided to value her, deserved a voice. In 1907, she was elected to parliament, one of the first 19 women in the history of the world to hold that title. She would go on to serve for decades. She would become a minister, a leader, a symbol, but she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the farm in western Finland, the cold mornings, the endless work, the silence that was expected of her. She turned that silence into something else entirely. Maria Loimaranta, was different from Mina Silampa in almost every way. She came from an educated family. She had atches. The night before, there are moments in history that only become clear, in retrospect, moments that looked ordinary. From the inside, a meeting in a cold hall, a vote in a quiet parliament, a signature on a document, but that carried within them the weight of everything that came before and everything that would come after. May 1906 was one of those moments. The Finnish parliament was preparing to vote. The question of women's suffrage had been debated for weeks. Arguments had been made on both sides. Speeches had been given. Petitions had been submitted. Newspapers had published editorials for and against. And now, the moment of decision was approaching. In the streets of Helsinki, women gathered, not in anger, not in fear, in quiet, determined hope. They had done everything they could do. They had argued. They had organized. They had built a movement from nothing, from factory floors and farmhouses and small apartments in cold city neighborhoods into something that could not be ignored. Now it was out of their hands. Now it was up to the men in that chamber to decide. And the women waited. What does it feel like to wait for someone else, to decide your future, to know that your fate, your rights, your voice, your place in society rests in the hands of people who have never experienced what you have experienced, who have never worked a 12-hour shift with no legal protection, who have never been told that their opinion does not matter, who have never had to fight just to be heard. The women of Finland knew that feeling. They had lived it their entire lives. And on that night, the night before the vote, they felt it more acutely than ever before. Lydia was 23 years old. She worked in a textile factory on the outskirts of Helsinki. She had been working there since she was 15. 8 years of early mornings and late nights and hands that ached from the constant motion of the machines on tea. The world after. The vote had passed. The law was written. The right was granted. But a right written on paper and a right lived in reality are two very different things. The women of Finland knew this better than anyone. They had spent decades fighting for the paper. Now came the harder work, turning those words into something real, into something felt, into something that changed not just the law, but the lives of ordinary women across the country. The elections of 1907 were unlike anything the world had ever seen. For the first time in history, women went to the polls as full citizens, not in one country, not in a small territory, not in a limited, partial way, fully, completely, equally. And they did not just vote. 19 women ran for parliament. 19 women won. Think about what that means. In 1907, there was not a single country on the entire planet, not Britain, not France, not the United States, not Germany, not any of the great powers that considered themselves the pinnacle of civilization, where a woman had ever sat in a national parliament. Not one. And then,
Finland.
19 women walking into that chamber, not as guests, not as observers, not as symbols, but as elected representatives of the Finnish people, with the same rights, the same voice, the same power as any man beside them. Who were these 19 women? They came from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, different political parties, different classes. Some were teachers, some were workers, some were from wealthy families, some had grown up in poverty, but they shared something more important than any of those differences. They had all lived in a world that told them they did not belong, and they had all decided, separately, in their own ways, in their own time, that they did not accept that. Mina Silampa took her seat in Parliament and immediately got to work. She was not interested in being a symbol. 5. What it means today. We live in a world that was built on the shoulders of people we never met, people who made decisions, difficult decisions, costly decisions, decisions that changed everything so that we could live the way we live today. We rarely think about them. We rarely stop in the middle of an ordinary day, voting in an election, reading the news, watching a woman give a speech, or lead a country, or run a company, and think, someone fought for this. Someone gave everything so that this moment could exist.
Finland 1906
Is not just history, it is a reminder of what is possible when ordinary people refuse to accept that things cannot change, a reminder of what it costs in time, in energy, in sacrifice to build a more equal world, and a reminder of what happens when that work succeeds. The women of Finland in 1906 did not know they were making history. They knew they were fighting for something important. They knew they were right. They knew they would not give up. But they could not have imagined standing in those cold halls, signing those petitions, giving those speeches, that more than a century later, people on the other side of the world would still be talking about what they did, would still be inspired by it, would still be learning from it. What can we learn from it? The first lesson is patience. Real change takes time. The women of Finland did not win in a day. They did not win in a year. They organized for decades. They faced setbacks. They faced ridicule. They faced the constant, grinding resistance of people who benefited from things staying the same. And they kept going, not because they were superhuman, not because they did not feel the exhaustion and the frustration and the despair, but because they understood deeply in their bones that giving up was not an option, that the cost of giving up was paid not by them, but by every woman who came after them, and they were